Why Western democracies have gone soft and what to do about it. This is another Even Wrong podcast. It's February 27, 2022. This is Krim Delco. It's a Sunday. No new updates. We are down 27% for the year, and the market's down 8.5%. We're underperforming by 18.5%. So Western democracies, in our opinion, have gone soft. That's a problem. It creates havoc. It creates people like Putin, or enables people like Putin, to be more precise. And that's a big problem. And I think we need to do something about it. So I want to talk about first why I believe Western democracies have gone soft, and then what to do about it. In short, the answer is why they've gone soft is because they're getting too much occupied about themselves. So kind of like a self-conscious teenager, Western democracies waste way too many resources thinking about minute problems, small problems that in the grand scheme of things are not such big problems. For example, equity, uneven distribution of wealth, and those sort of things, fairness, are all things that we can't achieve. We shouldn't be spending all our resources and all our political capital to fight these things. We should spend some time. But I think first and foremost, we always have to keep in mind that the biggest threat to Western democracy is an undemocratic dictatorship that is occupying us and then takes away all of the things that we fight for, including fairness and equity and all these things. So in other words, it is completely useless to have, let's say, an administration like we have now with Biden in power and the woke movement wasting resources in the United States, killing local schools and killing competition and making people feel bad about competing and all those sort of things in the name of equity or whatever they call it. And then on the other hand, being exposed to somebody like Vladimir Putin, who couldn't give a rat's ass, excuse my French, about all these things. And should he have the ability to terrorize us, he would, and then we would have much, much deeper problems. And I think the solution is we, as a Western democracy, need to stand up and understand that first and foremost, the protection of our liberty is the most important thing. I think the Second Amendment in the United States is part of that, meaning we need to protect our liberties also within our own country. We have to, of course, have the checks and balances in place to make sure that we can sustain that, including the Second Amendment not turning it against us with mass shootings and all that stuff. So there has to be, of course, a reasonable way, for example, checks and like a driver's license, a shooting license, all these things. I don't want to talk about particularly now gun control here. I just want to say that protecting liberty, being obsessed with liberty, in my opinion, is the most important obsession anybody on earth should have. Before anything else, before family, before religion, before whatever else you care about, protecting liberty, because no matter what, let's say you're obsessed about your religion, you're not going to be able to follow your religion if somebody else takes you over and takes away your liberty and your free choice to actually follow the particular religion. And I think the answer is to all these problems is to use deterrence, to use heavy weaponry, either real weaponry, soldiers on the ground, soldiers in the digital world. I don't care what the solutions are, state-of-the-art technology to deter people like Vladimir Putin and many others. He's just the tip of the iceberg. There's other people out there. And of course also include them, meaning give them a chance to compete. I think a lot of the problems that we have with Russia can be measured in numbers. The GDP of Russia is $1.5 trillion. It was $1.5 trillion 20 years ago, more or less. There has been nothing new, nothing has grown in Russia. Russia is a stagnating economy. In a place like that, you have two choices. One is emigration, which we see a lot of Russians here in Silicon Valley contributing like everybody else. But you also have the other choice, which is to turn into a military state, and that's what Russia is doing, as opposed to China, which of course is also a threat in many ways. But because China is succeeding in playing the game of global capitalism, they have successful companies, successful entrepreneurs, they have, most importantly, a successful academic institution that is growing and actually just about to take over even us, and maybe not Silicon Valley, but as a country, as the US, we're certainly exposed to the Chinese competition. So in other words, China is playing the game that we are playing and succeeding at it, and therefore has a lot less incentive to blow everything up. in plain English. That does not apply to Vladimir Putin and Russia. Again, Russia has just been stagnating over the years. I've seen that myself as a hedge fund manager. We've been working in Russia for years, investing in Russia, or at least thinking about it. We did invest in Russia. We lost money in Russia. The joke goes that you're not a real macro hedge fund manager if you haven't lost in Japan with the yen. Well, I think you can extrapolate that also to Russia. You're not a real macro equity global manager if you haven't lost money in Russia. And kudos to all those people who have made money in Russia. There are people actually that we know personally that are able to make money in Russia. We can't, because I think we're using a different framework of analysis that just doesn't work there. In other words, Russia is a place where, what I'm trying to say here is that it has not progressed. The companies we invested in were good companies. They were interesting companies. They were growth companies, but the growth always gets siphoned away either through corruption or even worse, through destruction. And therefore you can't just grow. That's why the GDP of Russia has not been growing in the last 20 years. Pretty much the same. Maybe it is growing because due to cosmetics or inflation or the oil price and all that stuff. But there's just no real, I mean, look at the Russian stock market. The IPOs there are almost non-existent. There's a little bit of Western Me Too companies such as Yandex, and good for them. But again, there's nothing real, nothing even close to what we have in the United States or even in Europe, where real companies are growing with solving real problems and creating real jobs, with giving young people perspectives other than becoming nationalist fanatics or whatever else people are in Russia these days. So what can we do? Again, inclusion is one way, but we haven't done it. The Russians chose not to include themselves. And we have to have a system in place, which is you either follow the rules of engagement or you get punished. I think rules of engagement is a nice metaphor for the theater of war, but I think we should use that not just for the theater of war, we should use it for the global economy, which is kind of a war. It's a much less violent war, but it's still a war. And I think rules of engagement apply a couple of things. It applies to everybody, US, China. There's certain things you do, certain things you maybe are sort of in the twilight zone, such as the Chinese stealing copyrights and all that. That's fine. I mean, we're not going to go punish everybody for everything the same way we don't punish people for stealing something in Walgreens all the time. But there are rules of engagement, and if you break them, then you get punished, you get taken out, either in prison or death. I think that has to be the message to any thug out there. Whatever name they have, they call themselves president, they call themselves warlord or drug lord or whatever they call themselves, it doesn't matter. What matters is that there's certain rules of engagement, and we as a Western society, we have the resources. We are the richest place on earth. In the US and include Western Europe and all the other Western countries, we have the resources. We're much richer. The GDP of Russia is less than the market cap of Apple. These are the dimensions we're talking about here. So we should absolutely be capable, from a resource perspective, to stand up and do what needs to be done to get people like the leader of Russia right now, to put them in line, and if they get out of line, to take them out. Again, either literally or virtually, it doesn't matter. I think what's also very important, of course, with these types of suggestions is always the sort of boomerang effect. Okay, well, if we have a society that accepts that kind of behavior, then how can we make sure that we protect our own liberties? And I think this is the fundamental problem we have with the United States, and part of the reason why Vladimir Putin is doing what he's doing, because we are weak. And when I say we, it's not just us in the United States. The same, again, applies to Western Europe, Germany, France. We are way, way too occupied with ourselves, with our own issues, and we just cannot, it's a luxury we don't have. We cannot spend our political capital on issues such as race and equity and all that stuff. It just doesn't work like that. We have to spend some of it, but we can't spend that much because we need to spend most of our political capital to protect our liberties and our freedom. Because again, without the liberties and the freedom, nothing else is even, What's the point of fighting for equity or for whatever representation of genders, or even worse, this whole shenanigans about gender equality and gender studies and all that stuff. It's not just bad in a sort of moral way, but it's also bad in a just simple freedom protecting way. If I don't have my freedoms, I don't care what you call yourself, he, she, or they. If you don't have the freedom to do that because somebody else is going to put you in jail or send you to a gulag or kill you or send a nuclear bomb and blow you up, then you know what? You can call yourself whatever you want. This is the fundamental problem. Like, we as a species have one fundamental constraint, which is we need to stay alive. And then right next to it, we need to keep our freedoms alive. If we want to have a free society, if we want to follow the experiment that was started way back in England and France and then instantiated in the United States through the Constitution, and then in Europe with Switzerland and France and so on and so forth, if we want to follow those types of ideas and instantiate them and call ourselves the free world and do what we did and have this kind of success that we had, if we want to keep doing that and not become the Roman Empire that falls that collapses under its own weight and gets taken over by the barbarians, then we need to understand that protecting our freedom inside the country and outside is the number one priority. And the pandemic has taught us that we don't have the political capital and we don't have the moral philosophy to protect our own freedom. This was one of the biggest shocking experiences of the pandemic. We gave up within days. We let ourselves be locked up, locked down, masked. We listened to people like Fauci, who, in my opinion, has overstepped many, many things that he shouldn't have done. And I'm not even talking about the risk that maybe they actually created the virus and all that stuff. This is simply, as a bureaucrat, you should have, he or people like him, and the same applies to the Faucis around the world, they should have followed protocol. I don't care. Protecting our freedom is more important than protecting our health. Protecting our freedom is more important than protecting the vulnerable, protecting the not people that don't feel safe, all that stuff. It is not the priority. It is a conversation that we can have, but it's not the priority. It can never be the priority. The way we gave up our freedoms during the pandemic was a lesson to people like Vladimir Putin that they can go around and actually take our freedom away if they want to. Or at least they can threaten them. We'll be scared like sheep. We need to stop being sheep. We need to get back to the wolf pack. We need to be the US Army after World War II, the most powerful place in the world. We had nuclear bombs. Nobody else had them. We did not use them in any major malevolent way. Yeah, we did some bad things for sure. But, you know, Truman was the most powerful man in the world because he could have blown up Russia, the Soviet Union. He could have done a lot of things he didn't. And maybe for bad, maybe for good, I don't care. I'm proud of what they did. But that generation is the greatest generation. It is the greatest generation because it has freed ourselves from fascism, from Japanese imperialism, from thugs, and it has not used its monopoly power on violence to exercise anything more than to restore a world in which we can all live and have an incredibly productive life. And me, I was born in the 60s. I was fortunate enough to reap a lot of that. I was born in the 60s in Europe. And I was, you know, with my parents and my family, and we all were beneficiaries of that. So I can't be thankful enough to this generation, particularly the Americans, but anybody else who was fighting the resistance in France and even the resistance in Germany, and all these people who resisted the fascist governments. But we're back today in a place, again, where we, as a country here in the United States, we elected a White House with Biden, and we allowed the left and the woke movement to go around, kill our academic institutions, even threaten our companies. Tesla was fined, I don't know, $100 million because supposedly they did something anti-racial, whatever, here in San Francisco. Here in San Francisco, where we live, our merit school was taken away, the merit high school, in the name of equity, destroyed. The good students now just go to private schools, and the poor and the not so wealthy, they just end up in a very terrible public school system. So it is bad, it is bad, it is bad. And the reason this is more serious than just a political conversation about, oh, they took away our merit school, is that this is all just the tip of the iceberg. We as a Western society, we are a Western democracy, we have forgotten that our number one priority is to protect our freedom. I've said that on this podcast before. Everybody's obsessed with something. We here in the United States are obsessed with freedom, and that's the right thing to be obsessed about. Europe is obsessed about not having another war. China is obsessed about not losing power over provinces. Taiwan's obsessed about China not taking over. Indonesia is obsessed about this and that. We're all obsessed about something. But I think, and this is my moral prerogative here, I think being obsessed about your freedom is the number one. If there's a list of obsessions, this has always to be number one. Because if I don't have freedom of choice, if I don't have freedom, defined as sort of in this Montesquieuian, Voltairean, and then Jeffersonian, and whatever way, this kind of thing that we call our U.S. Constitution and the Founding Fathers, and what the Europeans in Western Europe have with their constitutions, all that thought, all that philosophy, all that stuff, that's what I call freedom. That needs to be protected, and it can only be protected with guns and with digital technology and with cyber warfare and all that stuff, with special troops. And if people step out, they need to be taken out. And the way we control ourselves inside, so we don't actually, we don't fall victim to that trap where we protect ourselves against Putin and we become Putin. And I've said that in my Ai Weiwei critique of his memoirs, which are great, recommended reading. But I felt like Ai Weiwei fighting the Chinese Communist Party, he almost became a little bit a dictator himself, or a pretentious know-it-all, or something along those lines, which rubbed me off the wrong way a little bit. I mean, again, I have huge respect for him as a person and artist, but I just felt like if you fight a monster, make sure you don't become a monster. Nietzsche. This is a quote from Nietzsche that I think we as a society, we have to also be aware of. So if we fight somebody like Putin, make sure we don't become Putin. If we find something like COVID, make sure we don't become, we don't kill ourselves, or we don't destroy ourselves excuse me, there's some noise here. So what I'm saying is we have to find a way to fight threats such as the pandemic, such as Putin, without throwing our freedoms out overboard. And that's doable. We can have a strong army with checks and balances. We can have special operations troops. We can have cyber warfare. We can have all these things. And there are some examples. We have it in the United States. We have it in Israel. We have some of it in Europe, certainly the UK, MI5. Of course, there's a lot of corruption. Of course, there's a lot of bad things going on. But overall, we've been able to manage a society, a free society, with pretty strong law enforcement without that law enforcement overstepping. There's been a lot, I know people probably will scream now, what are you talking about? What about the NSO? What about the FBI? The CIA? I know, and we need to work on this, and that's what I meant. Instead of spending our political capital on Elizabeth Warren going around and trying to punish somebody like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the only person that is standing up to Putin right now and saying, you know what, you want to destroy the telecommunication in the Ukraine? I'm going to give them my Starlink connections. What is Biden doing? What is Elizabeth Warren doing to help the Ukrainians against the thug in Moscow? What is she doing? No, she's going to go around and try to tax Elon Musk even more. You see what's happening here. We need to stop this. People like Elizabeth Warren need to be put in place. Bernie Sanders, Biden, all these people. This woman in Brooklyn, whatever her name is, or Bronx, the crazy one, the left-wing one. They should have a voice. Like I said, don't become the monster, but fight it. I know how to fight. I know how to shoot. This is Pop Smoke, and I think we, as a Western society, we need to remember how to fight and how to shoot. It's fine. It's fine to go out there and foul. It's fine to put somebody down if they misbehave. Just make sure we have checks and balances in place. Make sure our arbiters are in place. Make sure that the whatever judicial system we have and all these things are in place, and fight for that and renew it. We need to put our judges, our lawyers, all of them need to be respected. And then we need to make sure that they don't become too powerful. Nobody can become too powerful. We need to have a system that puts things in place, but that if you overstep, you get put in place. If Fauci oversteps, he needs to be put in place. If some third-grade lawyer starts lawsuits that make no sense to put companies like Tesla in $100 million debt for nothing, they need to be put in place. The definition of a good government is a government that gets things done with as little coercion as possible. This is the optimization problem we have to deal with. You got to get things done, and don't coerce me. It's easy to coerce me. Then you're just becoming the monster you're fighting. You see, Elizabeth Warren, you wanna change inequality by becoming a monster yourself. You're just gonna give money to other people and make other people poor. That's not how it works. A good government is based on a Popperian principle of error correction, of change of power, change of ideas without violence, as little coercion as possible, and as fast and as low-cost change as possible to a better world, to a world that is better relative to whatever times we live in. We decide what's good for us right now. There's no absolute moral truth, none of that. We decide what's good for us. And again, if there is a list of obsessions, if there's a North Star, it is protect our liberties. And I think the one thing that Popper wasn't clear about, and this is my addition here in this particular episode, is, look, I want to have error correction, little coercion as possible, but I need to protect my freedom. The freedom itself, the Popperian principle of governance itself has to be protected, and that is a little bit of a paradox. Because how do I protect that? How do I error correct that? And how do I not let people like Elizabeth Warren or Biden and the woke people take that and turn that around and use that for their own constituency and then turn into a monster in the name of protecting somebody else's freedom and all that stuff? How do I make sure that the Popperian system of governance is protected while also making sure that I can use violence if necessary to attack people that are jeopardizing that particular system? This is the challenge, and I'm calling for a more powerful deterrent system for not just Vladimir Putin. He's the peak of the iceberg here. There's a lot of people within our own society that are tramping around our freedoms, and they need to be put in place. And this is how we're going to make sure that our kids also have as good of a future that we had when we were kids. Thank you.